You're listening to the Fertility Docs Uncensored podcast, featuring insight on all things fertility from some of the top-rated doctors around America. Whether you're struggling to conceive or just planning for your future family, we're here to guide you every step of the way.
Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Susan Hudson from Texas Fertility Center with another episode of Fertility Docs Uncensored. I am here with my bright, brave, and boisterous co-host, Dr. Carrie Bedient from Fertility Center of Las Vegas.
Hello.
And Dr. Abby Evelyn from Nashville Fertility Center.
Hi, everybody.
And we are so excited. We love having Dr. Mark Ratner, who is the Chief Science Officer at Theralogics.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
Hey.
We love having you. We get smarter every time you come on.
Well, I'll try not to disappoint.
And actually, Mark, we need to thank you, too. Thank you so much for reviewing our supplements chapter in our book. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you working and reviewing all that information for us.
It was really our pleasure and happy to be able to do that. And maybe you'll have some copies that you can share at ASRM.
We're
planning to.
Absolutely.
Okay.
There's one with your name on it for sure.
That'd be great. That'd be terrific.
So you just got back, aside from all of the fascinating science, you just got back from Iceland, right?
Yeah, we did.
What was your favorite thing that you did there? It's
Wow.
still...
Iceland is a really unusual place in that it's fire and ice, as they say,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a volcanic island. In fact, I think about 2 months ago, they had a pretty bad volcanic eruption there that temporarily shut down the airport and everything. And it's got all of these glaciers, and it's cold most of the year and windy, really windy.
Huh.
But hiking is great, and it's a landscape that's unlike anything you've ever seen.
Huh.
It's really beautiful. And Reykjavik, which is the capital city, is a great place to spend a few days. It is actually also the home to the only penis museum in the entire world. Yes.
Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yes.
You heard that on Fertility Docs Uncensored. If
as
you
a
want to go to a
board-certified
penis museum,
urologist-
you need to go to Iceland.
As a board-certified urologist, I had to go.
There
right?
you go. Of course. Out.
I asked for a discount when I got to the ticket booth, and they were like, "No, sorry." But it's an interesting place, and the
So did you
people
learn
there.
something in the museum? Or as a urologist,
museum?
did you know?
Not really. But believe it or not, it is the most visited museum in Iceland. Now
Believe
I
it.
am not really surprised
Maybe-
about that.
Yeah, I believe that.
that may sound like a low bar, okay, but they've got some really great art museums there, and the the National Museum of Iceland, which has all the Norse history and the Viking history and stuff, and so there's a lot of interesting stuff going on there. But this is the number one museum in Iceland, and
What is the food like in Iceland? Is it mainly
The food?
like the food? Is it mainly seafood?
yeah, it's a lot of fish and lamb. They have no beef there. They don't really grow cows, but lamb is their big thing. And of course, because it's an island with a pretty big fishing industry, lots of seafood and fish. You can go whale watching there. You can see the northern lights there.
Mm.
And so we did all of that stuff. It was great. A lot of hiking. You can go hiking on glaciers, and it's a fun trip. And at least from the East Coast, it's a very quick flight. It's like 5 hours to get there.
So I have a random food question about Iceland.
Sure.
It's an island in a location that has a very inhospitable climate and not a huge amount of sun. How do they get vegetables? Are there just greenhouses everywhere?
It's a great question. They have a short growing season, but they manage to do it. And it's very cloud covered, a lot of rain. And as somebody said before we went, you worry about the weather. They said, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad packing. Okay.
Sounds like
If
Scotland.
you bring everything that you might need, you'll be fine. And we were actually very lucky. We had a bunch of very sunny days, and it was great. It was a very nice trip. Interesting
Fun.
place.
So is this a good place to do like a 7-day trip, or is it a 10-day or a 2-week? What's the happy
think-
medium?
Yeah, we were there for 8 days, and I think that was sort of perfect. Reykjavik itself, you can spend maybe 3 days there. But then there's actually a road that goes around the entire island, which they call the Ring Road. And the northern and western So I guess it would be the western parts of that road are out in the middle of like nothing. There's very small little towns, maybe every few dozen miles. And so most people tend to hit the southern coast, and you can easily spend 2 or 3 days there. And then the northeastern coast, which has some really beautiful spots that you can stay overnight. I think like 8 days, 10 days is probably plenty. And the driving is easy. The steering wheel's on the proper side of the car. And it's not like going to England where
or
you're
Scotland.
constantly worried about stepping off the curb and not looking the right way. And the people are friendly, learned a lot of interesting things. There are no family surnames in Iceland. There are no family names. It's what they call a patronymic system, where you have your first name, and then your second name is the name of your father, followed by either son or dottir, Dottir, which means daughter. So Peterson would be Peter's son. Gunderson is Gunda's son.
Yeah.
Dottir would be Gunda's. And so everybody there's no way you can track your family back genealogically using a name, because there's no continuity of family names. It was like really interesting things to learn there. I mean, they're very concerned about keeping Iceland pure. So you don't get full citizenship if you don't follow that naming convention there.
Wow.
It's really, it's an interesting place.
So for those
And
people that do
Lithuania-
23 and those people that do 23andMe probably got some real big surprises with that system.
Yeah. But the person who was explaining this to us said that in Iceland, they have actually recorded every birth that took place in Iceland for the last 1,200 years.
Wow.
Crazy. Since like the Middle Ages. So you can actually, you don't even need the family name to track back 8, 10, 12 generations. Yeah.
Wow.
It's definitely an interesting place.
It's neat about the naming. In Lithuania, there's something similar that your last name changes. So you have kind of the male version of the last name, but for women, you have a different, I guess it would be suffix if you're unmarried. And then when you marry, and if you change your name, then the suffix to your married name, it doesn't match your husband. It has a suffix that essentially implies that you're married. It's very challenging to do things genealogically with the last names when you have that going on. It's like everything changes all the time.
Interesting. But I guess with that system, when you introduce yourself and tell somebody your name, they know your social situation.
Exactly. You're either on the market or off the market, at least for women. Here at Fertility Docs Uncensored, we've spent years answering your toughest fertility questions and walking alongside you on the IVF journey. And now we've taken everything we've learned from helping thousands of patients and from the thoughtful questions you've sent in for us to answer and put it all in one resource, our brand new book, The IVF Blueprint. This book is your step-by-step guide through the entire IVF process, written in the same conversational, down-to-earth style you've come to know from us. Whether you're just starting to explore IVF or you're already in the middle of treatment, the IVF Blueprint is designed to give you the clarity, confidence, and support you need. You can find the IVF Blueprint in print, as an ebook, and as an audiobook with a special conversation from us at the end, wherever books are sold. Links to purchase are also available on our website at fertilitydocsuncensored.com. So if you've been wanting an easy-to-understand, compassionate guide to IVF, pick up the IVF Blueprint today, and let's take this journey together. All right, well, let's do a question today. Our question today is, throughout my secondary infertility journey, I have met with 3 reproductive endocrinologists. To sum things up, I have a prolactinoma, managed well with medication, and have a left unicornuate uterus with a single blocked tube. Every RE has a different opinion. One said I should be happy I had my miracle and wouldn't recommend further treatment. One said she believes unicornuates can be great candidates for IVF. One's opinion was somewhere in the middle. How do I find authentic hope when all three experts have different opinions? Well, we may add 4 opinions to this, but I think we'll probably be somewhere in the same ballpark.
Yeah, I mean, I think people with all kinds of malformations can do just fine. If you talk to general OBGYN, they will tell you they deliver people all the time with bicornuate, unicornuate. So I would not be discouraged. I mean, ideally, it'd be nice if your uterus was normal shape, but I think you can do fine. You do have a higher risk of preterm labor and preterm delivery from an incompetent cervix. So, for whatever reason, the muscular part of the uterus is not as strong. But as long as your OBGYN knows about that, they can monitor that really closely. They may even put in a cerclage even before you have a go at it to make sure your cervix is strong enough to hold the pregnancy. And as long as you realize that and recognize that, the cerclage actually works pretty well. And then basically the cerclage, which is really a string that goes around the cervix, is just snipped, right before about 35, right around 36 weeks. And then you can go into a natural delivery on your own. So I wouldn't be discouraged. If it were me, I would try and get pregnant.
I think the biggest thing for you is that you've already been there, done that. You already have
Yeah,
a baby.
absolutely.
Unless that kid was 2 pounds and born at 29 weeks, I think that you've got a decent chance of it happening again. If you didn't have that history, I think the very wide range of advice is very reasonable, because there are some patients with unicornuate uterus that don't get very far. They do have preterm deliveries. They do have to use a surrogate. They can't get pregnant, all of those things. But you have a track record. And if you delivered somewhere in the 20-week, early 30 weeks, maybe you want to think twice. But if you made it reasonably close to term with a decent sized baby that's 5, 6, 7 pounds or more, I think it's reasonable for you to go for it, because you've been there, done that.
I agree with Carrie. I would say that I would be more in favor of, if you're going down the path of fertility treatment, doing something like IVF, where we can intentionally put back one embryo, and not
Yes.
where you're taking letrozole or Clomid, where you may ovulate multiple follicles at the same time, because it is a high risk pregnancy. We all acknowledge that. The last thing any of us want to do is have 2 babies in a very small apartment. IVF gives us the luxury of only having a 1% risk of that little embryo splitting. So that's the only thing I would add. But I would say you have a proven uterus. Yes, not everything goes exactly the same, but I feel a lot more warm and fuzzy than on a unicornuate uterus that hasn't been successful.
Exactly. Good luck. I hope it works well.
Yes. All right. So we're going to jump in and talk about some new and exciting supplements, some of which that we haven't talked about at all, and some of which that may have some new little additions onto them. So let's jump into NAD. Mark, what is NAD?
So NAD is actually a derivative of niacin, vitamin B3. NAD stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. Don't worry about that. It's basically, it's not a new compound. It's not something recently discovered. It's been around. The scientists discovered it more than 100 years ago. So what is new about NAD, and really when I say new, I'm talking about maybe just starting about 20 years ago, its incredibly important role in each of our cells has been more and more well understood. And the key about NAD is that it is present in every one of our cells in the body. And it comes in 2 forms. One form is called NAD+, and the other form is called NADH. One form is oxidized, and the other form is reduced. So we call that a redox pair. And the 2 switch back and forth in our cells all the time. And NAD serves 2 basic functions in our cells. One function is in energy production. And it's actually the NADH version, the reduced version, is really critical for mitochondrial energy production. The oxidized version, NAD+, okay, that version of NAD, that form of NAD, activates certain enzymes in our body, in our cells. And so the energy function of NAD has been shown to be critical for egg quality. And the enzyme activation version, okay, the NAD+ version, is really critical for activating a class of enzyme called sirtuins. So sirtuins were just discovered 20 years ago. And they were first discovered in yeast. And what they discovered was something called SIR2, SIR2. SIR stands for Silent Information Regulator. So they discovered this enzyme in yeast. And what they discovered was that if they could crank up the amount of SIR2 enzyme in yeast, the yeast would live 30, 40% longer. So they said, wow, this is a longevity enzyme. This is an enzyme that allows organisms to live longer. And it turns out that SIR2, which was this version that they found in yeast, it's the ancestral version of the sirtuin enzymes that are present in our cells. And so there are actually 7 different sirtuins, and we call them SIRT, SIRT1, SIRT2, SIRT1, SIRT2, SIRT3, up through SIRT7. Those enzymes, basically, from an evolutionary perspective, they descended down from that original yeast enzyme. What they discovered, though, was that you needed NAD plus for those SIRT enzymes to be activated. And they said, okay, well, if we can increase SIRT enzyme activity and we can increase NAD activity and make yeast live longer, let's try other organisms. And so the next thing they tried was roundworms. And the yeast lived 30% longer, and the roundworms lived about 20% longer. So then they said, okay, let's try something a little bit more complicated than worms. And so they went to fruit flies. And the fruit flies lived about 10% longer. It seemed to be the more complicated the organism got, the less lifespan benefit.
That's helpful, yeah.
Then they finally went to mice, and the mice didn't live any longer. But what they did discover was that the mice stayed healthier longer.
Take that.
They have this, there's this concept that we now think about. There's lifespan, meaning how long are you going to live? But now the concept that a lot of the focus is on is what we call health span, meaning staying healthier longer. And they have now done a number of clinical trials in people where they're increasing NAD using supplements. They can increase NAD. And of course, to try and prove longevity benefit in a person, that would be many, many years of study, right? But they are showing real significant benefits in terms of health span. It reduces inflammation. So they studied people who had peripheral artery disease, bad circulation in their legs, and had problems walking. And they took these people and they randomized them, either get a placebo or an NAD supplement. And the people who got in a blinded study, and the people who got the NAD supplement could walk much further after 6 weeks of treatment than the people who got the supplement. So it increases energy production.
What dose, Mark, were they on? Do you remember what dose?
Of that study, I don't. But the interesting thing is how do you supplement NAD? In other words, if your goal is to increase NAD levels in the cell, do you just take NAD? Well, the answer, what's that?
Or do you have to take a precursor?
That's exactly it. You've got to take a precursor. You can't take NAD itself because, number one, you won't absorb it very well from your stomach. And number two, even the small amount that might get absorbed can't get through the cell membranes and into the target tissues. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't companies out there. No, well, there's 2 things. There are clinics. There are clinics around the country where you can go in and you lay down and they stick an IV in your arm and they'll give you NAD intravenously. There's even a company that'll sell you a kit. You can give yourself an injection at home of NAD. So this is hot stuff, and they advertise it as anti-aging and lifespan extension, except the data on that stuff is pretty shaky. You don't have to take it intravenously or intramuscular. You can take a supplement that is a precursor. And there's basically 2 different precursors that work. One is called NMN, which stands for nicotinamide mononucleotide. The problem with NMN is that the FDA has stopped sales of that in the United States. Not because it's unsafe, not because it doesn't work, but because there are these regulations that if a company has already filed to make this into a drug and they're doing clinical trials for drug development, it's not allowed to be sold as a supplement. Okay. So NMN is basically off the market.
Okay. I'm remembering something from a prior episode where we were talking about something about the differences in a supplement versus a pharmaceutical.
A drug? Uh-huh.
Yeah. Can you refresh my memory about
Sure.
why that's an important?
Yeah, so it's a strange regulatory kind of environment. The FDA considers a product that is claiming to treat disease or prevent disease a drug, no matter what that product might contain. The best example I can give you is that, we make a cranberry product for UTI risk reduction. It's essentially a cranberry extract powder. But we've now had that product used in multiple clinical trials, and two of them sponsored by the NIH. When those clinical trials get underway, the FDA has to approve the use of that cranberry powder as an investigational new drug. And we say, well, wait, it's just cranberry powder. They don't care. It's the claim that you're making about its effect that makes it either a drug or not a drug.
Okay.
And so that's why on a supplement bottle, you'll always see this little print, what we call the FDA disclaimer. And it says something along the lines of, this product is not intended, have been approved by the FDA. It is not intended to treat, prevent, or cure any disease. And that's basically saying we're not claiming this is a drug.
RMA of New York is a global leader in state-of-the-art reproductive medicine, serving as Division of Reproductive Endocrinology and Infertility at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai. Led by an integrated team of physicians and scientists, RMA of New York is renowned for its pioneering research in the field and for delivering high IVF success rates. With locations across Manhattan, Brooklyn, Westchester, and Long Island, RMA of New York has helped thousands to build the families of their dreams for more than 2 decades. And counting.
So a company has essentially filed what's called an investigational new drug application for NMN with the FDA. And they did that several years ago. And once that happens, it shuts off any opportunity to sell it as a supplement.
Wow.
So that's why NMN is not really available in the United States. The other precursor is called nicotinamide riboside, and we just say NR for short. Both of those are safely taken as a supplement, and the body in our cells, we convert that into NAD very efficiently. And so it works well. So the interesting thing about NAD in terms of fertility is that, number one, they're looking to improve egg quality in the short term over the course of several months prior to an attempt at conception, whether it's through IVF or IUI or timed intercourse, whatever it might be. If you can increase cellular NAD, you're potentially going to improve egg quality in the short term. But the other thing is that by increasing NAD levels, we improve sirtuin activity. All right, so here's where the sirtuins come in. And this is really so interesting. Every month, and I'm not telling you guys anything that you didn't have to learn years and years ago, okay? But for the people who are listening, every month, as everybody knows, a woman is born with all of her eggs in a sort of dormant state in her ovaries. And the best estimate is that's about 2 million eggs, a lifetime supply. And those eggs, those dormant sleeping eggs, those are in the bank, so to speak. That's what everybody would consider the ovarian reserve. That's what's sitting there. And then every month during a woman's reproductive years, roughly 1,000 of those dormant follicles activate. And then those 1,000, over the course of 12 months roughly, they gradually change, they gradually mature into antral follicles. They mature into basically more complete follicles until finally, at the end of that 12-month process, one follicle is left, the dominant follicle. And that's the follicle that ovulates 12 months later and releases the egg. What happens to the other 999? They basically degenerate and they become, what we say, atretic. And so if that happens every month during a woman's reproductive years, that's roughly 400 to 500 times. And if you figure 1,000 each month, although it starts to decline as a woman gets older. It's not a full 1,000, but let's say it was a full 1,000. That's 500,000 of those, what we call primordial follicles, the dormant sleeping follicles that are sitting there waiting to be activated. That's 500,000. 1,000 a month times 500 months, right? So what happens to the other 1.5 million? We started with 2 million, right? What happens with the other 500,000? They basically become atretic. They degenerate over the course of time. So once those dormant follicles activate and they start to mature, the maturation process is under the control of FSH, the hormone that everybody's familiar with in terms of both men and women. FSH helps the egg and the sperm develop. But it turns out that what controls the activation going from from a primordial follicle to what we call a primary activated follicle at 1,000 that change over every month, that's controlled by SIRT1, sirtuin-1. And in order for sirtuin-1 to work, it needs NAD to be present. And so the more sirtuin-1 is present in the cells, the fewer primordial follicles activate each month. If the sirtuin levels are low, more and more follicles get activated. So if you can increase sirtuin levels, and this has been shown in mouse models really, really thoroughly, increasing sirtuin levels, increasing NAD levels, slows the recruitment of primordial follicles into primary follicles. And so you're keeping more eggs in the bank.
So are you suggesting that taking this precursor can extend the reproductive lifetime?
It's been very, very convincingly shown in 5 different studies over the last 5 years in mice. Now, you might say, okay, well, mice and people aren't necessarily the same, right? Why is the mouse a good model here for this type of work? Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first is, number one, mice only live 2 years. It's a short and brutal life, especially in a lab. But they can start reproducing at 8 weeks. So just like women, they are born with primordial follicles, a fixed number of eggs in their ovary. Their ovarian reserve, the number of eggs that remain, decline throughout their life. By 8 months to 12 months, mouse eggs have the same chromosomal abnormalities, aneuploidy, as human eggs do. And by 18 months of age in mice, the ovarian reserve is completely gone and they're not ovulating anymore. So there are some very distinct parallels in terms, and it's a terrific model to use because unlike a woman where you're going to have to say, treat somebody for 5 or 6 years to see whether or not you're actually slowing in a significant way the loss of ovarian reserve and extending reproductive health span. In mice, you can tell that much more quickly. Now, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I have so many questions, and
Go ahead.
let me just ask a few of them, and then you can go. You can just keep on talking. Okay, so one of the questions is, so I've had a couple of patients who are like, "Oh, should I be taking NAD?" So is this something that if you're about to hop right into fertility treatment now, it probably isn't going to have an effect because what's done is done? Do you need to start taking this when you're 25 because I'm not wanting to reproduce until I'm 35 or 40? How does the timing in humans and in the fertility landscape where I want to be pregnant yesterday, how does it fit in?
Excellent questions. So the first human study was just presented in Paris in June at ESHRE, at the big European fertility meeting. It was an abstract. I'm not going to tell you it was a great abstract. It left you scratching your head about certain questions. They didn't even disclose the dose or the absolute duration that they had used. It was a retrospective study with 50 women, actually under 35 years of age, all had diminished ovarian reserve. I think they had to have an AMH under 1 and maybe an antral follicle count under 5. And they were all given there was a control group or a group that took NMN, the precursor. This was done overseas. And so they had a doubling of fertilization rates and a doubling of clinical pregnancy rates in the group that took NMN. Okay. Now, this was an abstract. Hopefully, if this gets published in Human Reproduction, they'll have
more details.
They'll have some more details. Here's the problem with, so the obvious question is, do we need to wait for prospective placebo-controlled human studies to be published before we say this science is exciting, it's safe, and it holds great promise, and we should start thinking about using it? So the challenge here is that because these are supplements, because this is a supplement. By the way, I should have mentioned, the product that we've launched is not only the precursor of NAD, nicotinamide riboside, but it also has pterostilbene, which increases SIRT1 levels. So that's the combination. If you look at what happened in, like, say, the CoQ10, the evolution of that science, coenzyme Q10, it was 15 years ago. The first studies that got published were mouse studies, and they specifically looked at aneuploidy, abnormal chromosome development in eggs, and they showed a clear benefit in mice. Kasparov in Toronto started a human study, and he tried for 2 years. He had 4 sites enrolling patients, and after 2 years, they had to close the study because they couldn't enroll patients, they couldn't enroll couples. If you try to do a supplement study in the fertility world against placebo, where the supplement is something you can basically purchase without a prescription, no one wants to enroll.
Because everybody just wants to go buy it and be on it.
If you give them informed consent, if you say, here's the consent, you can either get placebo, 50% chance you're going to get a sugar pill, or 50% chance you're going to get this product that we think might help you conceive and succeed in your treatment. And by the way, this is not prescription. You can buy this on Amazon. Okay. Goodbye. Yeah. So it took 10 years for there to be studies done with CoQ10 in women going through fertility treatment. There are now 6 of them that are placebo-controlled studies, all done in China. Maybe they have a better compliant patient. I don't know. Maybe the patient population in China is just way more willing to go along and happy to just get treated for nothing. It's almost impossible to do these studies in the United States. And to do that kind of a study is very expensive. And, typically you're going to either have to have government funding, which these days is
hard to come by.
Non-existent.
Yeah. Especially in this new age of, what's it called? Restorative reproductive
medicine. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so the point here is this. We think this is safe. There is good mechanistic evidence. There's a very firm foundation of understanding the science as to how these interventions potentially work. And by the way, again, comparing mice and men, those 7 sirtuins, okay, are exactly the same in mice as they are in people, and they serve exactly the same function. It's interesting, each of these 7 sirtuins plays different biological roles, and the role that each of them plays is determined by its location in the cell, whether it's in the nucleus or the cytoplasm or the mitochondria, what its enzymatic action is, and then what its target sort of molecules are. And so these 7 sirtuins they're considered the master regulators of cellular metabolism. The 7 sirtuins are essentially, from an evolutionary perspective, they all are descended from that original ancestral version. But SIRT1 is by far the best studied, and it's the one that has the most action and importance in ovarian function. The interesting thing, I'm going to mention one last thing. You might say, well, okay, if increasing SIRT1 levels in the ovary reduces the number of primordial follicles that get recruited each month. So let's say instead of 1,000, it's only 800. Yes, you're keeping more in reserve, but what about the fact that you only start with 800? Are you still going to get to ovulation 12 months later? And the really cool thing is that what SIRT1 does, besides slowing recruitment of those primordial follicles, is that it increases the responsiveness of granulosa cells to FSH. And so basically what happens is as those primary follicles start to mature over the course of 12 months, leading up to that final dominant follicle, SIRT1 increases that efficiency. It increases the receptivity of granulosa cells, the cells that surround the egg in the follicle, to the effects of FSH. So
I
where
have
does
two
it?
questions.
Go ahead.
I love these episodes. Oh my goodness. It's
My
everything
brain
I
is
want to know. My first question is, and of course
Yeah.
you can only comment in mice, but when you're having this supplement and you're saving up eggs for later, are those eggs for later acting as if they are younger than what they are at that point in time? So I've been doing this and I'm 5-month-old mouse, and at month 10, are they acting younger?
Yes. So I can tell you about the mouse studies. And again, there's only been the one human study. But in the mouse studies, what they basically have done is they've started treating, and they've used both MMN and NR in the mouse studies. They've started treatment anywhere from 8 to 10 months of age, which would sort of be analogous to a woman in her mid 30s to maybe 40-ish, okay, in terms of reproductive ovarian reserve and the risk of egg aneuploidy. And what they've consistently seen is that the mice, after 4 months of treatment, or actually it's one of the studies treated for as long as only 4 weeks in mice, a couple of the others did 4 months. But at the end of treatment, you basically ended up with mice that had the same amount of aneuploidy as a 3-month-old mouse. And by 18 months, they were still ovulating. So it essentially extended, the authors call it rescued. It rescued ovarian aging. Now, is this something that we would think is as reliable as egg freezing? Probably not. I mean, can we say for a woman who is really concerned about preserving her options for the future, there's no question that vitrifying her eggs, freezing those eggs at this point is going to do the job, right? But we also know that it's only a minority of women who come in for consultation that end up
Freezing
proceeding.
their eggs.
And so I think earlier you said, is this something that a woman who's maybe 32 or 33 and decides against freezing her eggs could use as a fallback option? Potentially.
So my next question is, and I know you're probably not going to want to answer this one, but my question is, all of our patients are on vitamin overload. They come in with their giant
Sure.
Ziploc baggie of 4 million things, and we're all big CoQ10 believers, a lot because of you, quite
Yeah,
frankly.
absolutely.
But if they're like, okay, I'm either going to do CoQ10 or I'm going to do the NAD supplement, what are your thoughts?
I think they're both important for energy production in the mitochondria in the egg. They both work by helping the electron transfer chain, but they work in different parts. And so they don't overlap. They sort of complement each other to some degree. And, I think we're very far away from a study that will say, let's try one or the other or the combination. But from a mechanistic perspective, because we understand where they function in that process of energy production and they function in different places, there are some very clear similarities that you're pointing out. CoQ10 levels decline as we get older. NAD and sirtuin levels decline in the cells as we get older. They've even figured out why NAD levels decline as much as they do. And this is not mouse study. This is human data. NAD, as I mentioned, it's important for activating certain enzymes in the cells. Sirtuins are the ones we just finished talking about. NAD actually has to be there to activate the sirtuins. There's another enzyme which is really critical in our bodies, which is called CD38. And CD38 triggers many of the most important immune responses in our body.
Mm-hmm.
As we get older and our cells age, there's more and more inflammatory response that gets triggered. And that requires increased CD38. As CD38 activity goes up, NAD level goes down because the activation of CD38 by NAD consumes the NAD. So the primary driver of NAD decline in our cells is this enzyme called CD38, which as we get older, just gobbles up the NAD. NAD levels in a person who's 60 or 70 are a third of what they were in the cells compared to when that person was, say, 25 or 30. And so that's why no one's going to do a study anytime soon that shows whether NAD makes us live longer. But that's a real roll of the dice for people who think that they're going to, use it as an anti-aging. But whether or not it can improve health span and ovarian health span, I think is a much better bet.
So I know we've talked a lot about NAD. There's one additional thing I'd really like us to talk about.
Sure.
At Theralogics, we've had ovasitol available for a long time now. It's a great product for women who have PCOS or are anovulatory, who have metabolic issues like glucose intolerance. But I noticed recently that you have a new product, and I was curious, what's the difference between ovasitol version 1 versus what you now have as well?
Sure. Okay. So the newest product, the newer version, is called Ovasitol Plus. And the primary plus is a component that was added, which is called alpha-lactalbumin. It's a milk protein. And the purpose of adding that is that somewhere about 35% of women who take inositols, which is what ovasitol is. It's a combination of myoinositol and dechirioinositol. But about 35% of women, roughly a third, have problems absorbing it. When we first learned about this, it was sort of surprising because it's a sugar alcohol. It's a fairly simple molecule. And you would think, well, it just gets absorbed easily from the GI tract. But it turns out, no, inositols require what we call active transport to be absorbed from the GI tract. But about a third of women don't absorb it that well.
How can we tell who absorbs it and who doesn't?
Well, non-responders. A significant percentage of women who are non-responders who take inositols and don't seem to have much benefit, maybe that may be the group that's not absorbing it as well. And they've done these studies looking at blood levels. So it's not just a guess. It's not just saying, hey, the basic study that used alpha-lactalbumin, and I'm going to make up some numbers that kind of show you the example. I don't remember the exact numbers, but let's say they started with 100 women who were anovulatory, and they all got inositols, plain inositols, and about 65 of them responded and started ovulating. That's a typical percentage that you might see for women with PCOS. They then took the 35 that had not, and they gave them inositols with alpha-lactalbumin. And of those 35 initial non-responders, about 2/3 of them now responded. So the addition of alpha-lactalbumin enhances absorption of the inositols. Whether it's an all or none thing, or whether every woman who takes it with alpha-lactalbumin is going to get somewhat better absorption, that's not been determined. Yeah.
I have a different but sort of related question. Carrie and Susan and I have all had the experience where a patient doesn't absorb estrogen the way she should. We always say, take the pill and put it in your vagina. And I just had a patient the other day that looked at me like I had 3 heads, and she's like, but it's a pill. And I'm like, I know. Put it in your vagina. It's a mucous membrane. So it's interesting, I think, which is great. You talk a lot about being worried about absorption, gummy vitamins. And I think that's really a critical thing because you may take all these very expensive vitamins or not expensive vitamins and just not absorb them. So to my question, it is can vitamin pills be used vaginally? Can that pill be used vaginally? Because in women, a lot of times we get better absorption vaginally than we do through the stomach.
Yeah. I think the answer has to be it depends. Okay, first of all, ovasitol is a powder that gets mixed with water, right?
Okay.
And this is an interesting, getting back to these FDA kind of regulatory things. A
I know
supplement,
you may not be able to tell us that we can do it, but in theory,
right? If a supplement is sold as, you're not allowed to call a supplement a sublingual supplement.
okay.
It cannot be absorbed through a mucosal membrane. It can only be absorbed from the stomach or intestines. GI has to be ingested, not absorbed. So technically that wouldn't be a supplement, but there are plenty of, so for instance, melatonin. which has terrific benefits in terms of for egg quality and fertility. That's a whole nother episode, though. But melatonin can easily be taken sublingually. It'll be absorbed really well. Okay. And so I think it depends on the actual molecule. Some are going to go through mucous membranes better than others. And I mean, they put nicotine in patches that go on the gut. They've done testosterone, buccal testosterone patches. So I think it depends.
So I have another question. I have a lot of my patients that I've used the Ovasitol supplement to help them get pregnant. Most of them, as long as they're tolerating it and they're happy with it, I encourage them to continue it through pregnancy, theoretically to help improve glucose metabolism and those types of things, maybe decreasing their risk of gestational diabetes and those types of complications. Can the Ovasitol Plus also be used during pregnancy?
Thank you for asking that question. The answer is no. It should not. And we make this very clear in all of the materials that come with Ovasitol Plus. Ovasitol Plus has 3 additional components. The first I've already mentioned, which is the alpha-lactalbumin, just a milk protein, which is totally safe. It's basically just a component that's found in milk. The other 2 components are vitamin D, a little bit of extra vitamin D, which can't hurt. But the third one is chromium. And the reason that we've included chromium is because it is an insulin sensitizer. Really, really good science to show the benefits of chromium as improving insulin function and reducing insulin resistance. Problem is, we have 200 micrograms of chromium in a daily dose of Ovasitol Plus. Okay. And there are no studies that have looked. There are plenty of studies showing 30 micrograms, 50 micrograms, totally safe during pregnancy. There are no studies that show whether 200 micrograms is safe or not. It may well be, but we don't know. And so to err on the side of caution, we basically say, look, if you're trying to deal with metabolic issues, weight, hair, skin issues that the PCOS is creating, this is a terrific option. If you're trying to conceive, there's no danger if you stay on it for a week or 2 once you're pregnant. But once you confirm a pregnancy, switch to regular Ovasitol. And the benefit of regular Ovasitol, of inositols during pregnancy, particularly for women with PCOS, I think pretty well established. There was actually just a new meta-analysis released this week, 8 different studies showing that it reduces the risk of gestational diabetes by about 50%. And so, although, and we follow the literature really closely, JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association, just published a study 2 weeks ago that had been done, I think, in England, maybe in England or the Netherlands, I forget, where they enrolled women prospectively with PCOS and then kept them on it, and either inositols or placebo, kept them on it throughout their pregnancy and found no difference in the risk of gestational diabetes. But again, the devil's in the details. If you look at the inclusion criteria for that study, the average at the time of entry into the study, the average HbA1c in both arms of the study was 5.1.
Dude, I can't get a 5.1 on my non-PCOS
And be
patient.
diabetic, yeah.
I would kill for a 5.1, okay? I would
They're
kill
well
for
controlled.
So, and the average BMI was like 24.5.
We
So this
don't
was-
really have that in the South.
Yeah, that's not really.
Okay, so I guess the point is that if these were women with PCOS, and they were enrolled using Rotterdam criteria, but they clearly were not the classic phenotype.
No, not at all.
What was the risk of insulin resistance in these women? They never measured that. They never measured, insulin resistance or insulin sensitivity. And I think the answer to the question probably is that the higher your BMI, the greater your risk of gestational diabetes, the more potential benefit. I think overall, given how many studies have now been published, it's safe to stay on inositols during pregnancy, but not Ovasitol Plus. We do want you to switch back.
Oh my goodness, Mark.
Very
I get
nice.
smarter every time we talk. You're just amazing.
I'm happy I can be of service. Yeah. And so listen, I'll just mention real quickly, Ovanad Plus, OVANAD Plus is the name of our product, which is It's nicotinamide riboside plus pterostilbene, the goal being to increase NAD levels and SIRT1 levels. And we think it has potential benefit both short-term in terms of improving egg quality. A woman who's going to do egg freezing might want to start taking that 2 or 3 months prior to doing the egg freeze, and potentially as a fallback option for a woman who, for whatever reason, decides she can't or doesn't want to do an egg freeze. This might be a way of slowing the loss of ovarian reserve. Last thing I'll tell you, we are planning a clinical trial. We are going to be looking at women with diminished ovarian reserve, but not pathologic. In other words, over the age of, say, 38, we're still working out our inclusion criteria, and we're going to be looking at AMH levels after 6 months of treatment, placebo versus our product, looking at both AMH levels and antral follicle count.
Great.
Wonderful. Well, keep all of us in mind when you're developing your study.
Yeah, well, we're trying to make our way through some FDA regulatory questions, because if it's women trying to conceive, okay, this gets back to what's a drug versus what's a supplement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you tell the IRB, the group that's going to tell you, yes, you can do the study, if the IRB says, oh, well, you're treating women with infertility, therefore the FDA needs to bless this study. So now we're looking at maybe we can enroll women in that age range who say, not trying to conceive, but we're working through that.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Again, Dr. Mark Ratner, the Chief Science Officer from Theralogics. All of the products that we talked about today are available on theralogics.com. But we love having you, and we're always blessed every time you make a presence on Fertility Docs Uncensored.
I'll see you guys soon.
Absolutely. And
Bye-bye.
to our audience, thank you so much for listening, and subscribe to Apple Podcasts to have next Tuesday's episode pop up automatically for you. And be sure to subscribe to YouTube. That really helps us spread reliable information and help as many people as possible.
Visit fertilitydocsuncensored.com to submit questions and sign up for our email list. Pick up your copy of the IVF Blueprint today at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or your favorite bookstore. Check out our Instagram or TikTok for quick hits of fertility tips between episodes.
And as always, this podcast is intended for entertainment, and it's not a substitute for medical advice from your own physician. Subscribe, sign up for our emails, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.